You embarrassed yourself the moment you judged the wrong woman." The words had not been spoken yet, but before the night was over they would echo through a ballroom where champagne flowed, cameras flashed, and a $750 million partnership waited for a single signature. At exactly 7:42 p.m., inside the crystal-lit Grand Regent Ballroom in downtown Chicago, every major executive from Sterling Holdings gathered beneath glittering chandeliers to celebrate what financial reporters were already calling the deal of the year. Investors mingled beside towering floral displays, while photographers captured smiling families dressed in custom tuxedos and evening gowns. Waiters moved quietly through the crowd carrying silver trays as a string quartet played in the background, creating the perfect picture of wealth and prestige. Then the music seemed to disappear beneath a sharp voice that sliced across the room. "Watch where you're going." Madison Sterling, 24, daughter of billionaire developer Richard Sterling, stared at a woman dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit without designer logos or obvious jewelry. The woman had accidentally brushed against her while stepping aside to avoid another guest. Instead of accepting the quiet apology offered with calm sincerity, Madison lifted her hand and struck the woman's cheek with a quick, impulsive slap that echoed far louder than anyone expected. The ballroom froze. Conversation stopped. Glasses paused halfway to waiting lips. A photographer instinctively lowered his camera. Richard Sterling glanced toward his wife Victoria before both exchanged amused smiles that suggested the moment was nothing more than an inconvenience caused by someone they assumed did not belong among America's corporate elite. Madison folded her arms confidently. "Maybe next time you'll learn where staff members are supposed to stand," she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A few uncomfortable laughs escaped from people unsure whether they should challenge the powerful family standing before them. The woman touched her cheek only briefly, not in anger, not in fear, but almost as if confirming reality. Her breathing never changed. Her posture remained perfectly straight. She neither raised her voice nor demanded an apology. That silence unsettled several executives far more than shouting ever could have. Daniel Cooper, the event director overseeing the evening, looked across the ballroom with growing confusion. Something about the woman's face felt strangely familiar. He searched his memory while scanning the guest list on the tablet in his hands, but before he could speak, Madison laughed again. Security should really do a better job keeping people like this away from private events. Richard nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Tonight is for decision makers," he added. "Not everyone understands that." The surrounding guests shifted uneasily. Some avoided eye contact. Others quietly stepped back, sensing the atmosphere had changed in ways no amount of expensive decor could disguise. The woman simply looked around the magnificent ballroom, taking in every face, every whispered comment, every nervous glance. She seemed less concerned about what had happened to her than about what everyone else had chosen to reveal about themselves. Somewhere across the room, a large digital screen displayed the Sterling Holdings logo beside the words Strategic Partnership Celebration. Beneath those glowing letters waited a polished table where one final contract rested inside a leather portfolio. Hundreds believed the agreement was already guaranteed. Only one person in the entire ballroom knew that nothing had been signed yet, and that the future of every smiling executive present depended entirely on the quiet woman everyone had just underestimated. Naomi Brooks slowly lowered her hand, smoothing the sleeve of her navy jacket as though the interruption had been nothing more than an unexpected breeze drifting through the ballroom. She did not demand attention. She did not search for sympathy. Instead, she quietly picked up the leather invitation folder that had slipped onto the marble floor and placed it neatly under her arm. The room remained suspended in silence because everyone expected outrage, yet none arrived. Madison Sterling interpreted that silence as surrender. She smiled confidently, turning towards several young investors standing nearby. "See? I told you. Real executives do not just wander into private events looking like they belong." A few nervous chuckles followed, though several faces revealed discomfort rather than amusement. Naomi calmly looked toward the enormous windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, where the last colors of sunset reflected across the glass towers surrounding the hotel. The view reminded her of another evening nearly 20 years earlier when she had walked into her very first investment conference wearing a department store blazer she could barely afford. A receptionist had politely suggested she wait outside because the event was reserved for company representatives. She had quietly shown her registration, attended every session, and left that conference with the first investor who believed in her vision. That single meeting eventually became the foundation of Brooks Infrastructure Group. She had promised herself that day she would never allow another person's assumptions to decide her worth. Tonight felt strangely familiar. Different ballroom, different faces, the same quiet judgment. Daniel Cooper continued studying the guest roster on his tablet while glancing repeatedly toward Naomi. He knew he had seen her somewhere important, but the memory remained just beyond reach. Before he could approach, Richard Sterling stepped beside his daughter and spoke with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in every room. "Young lady, this evening is reserved for invited executives and ownership representatives. If there has been a misunderstanding, my staff can escort you to the public reception downstairs." Naomi met his eyes without hesitation. "I appreciate your concern," she answered evenly, "but I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Victoria Sterling gave a quiet laugh. "Confidence is admirable," she replied, "but pretending does not make someone important." Madison folded her arms again. Maybe she printed a fake invitation online. Several guests looked toward Naomi's invitation folder, noticing the embossed executive seal on its cover, but no one said a word. They waited to see how the moment would unfold. Across the ballroom, a hospitality employee paused while arranging champagne glasses, whispering to a coworker that the woman being questioned did not look frightened at all. In fact, she looked remarkably patient. Daniel finally enlarged the digital guest list on his tablet, scrolling carefully through dozens of executive names. His heartbeat quickened when he noticed one entry marked with the highest level of security clearance available for the evening. Before he could read the full profile, another event coordinator hurried over and quietly asked him to prepare the stage because the final signing ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than 15 minutes. Daniel looked back toward Naomi one more time. Something about the timing no longer made sense. If the name he thought he recognized truly belonged to the woman standing alone in the center of the ballroom, then everyone watching this humiliation had misunderstood the most important person in the room. Daniel Cooper tried to return his attention to the evening schedule, but his instincts refused to let the moment pass. He quietly reopened the encrypted guest registry on his tablet, entering additional credentials reserved for executive verification. Before the screen could finish loading, Richard Sterling gestured toward two hotel security supervisors standing near the ballroom entrance. They approached respectfully, uncertain why they had been summoned. Richard smiled politely, making certain nearby investors could hear every word. "There seems to be some confusion. Please assist this guest to the public reception area so our private ceremony can continue on schedule." The supervisors hesitated, looking first at Naomi, then at Daniel, sensing tension that extended far beyond an ordinary misunderstanding. Naomi remained composed. She neither stepped backward nor forward. "There is no need," she said with steady confidence. "I will remain exactly where my invitation requires me to be." Madison laughed softly and looked around as though inviting everyone to enjoy the spectacle. "You still think you belong at the signing table?" she asked. "That table is for people-making. Decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Victoria Sterling added with a pleasant smile that barely concealed her judgment. "Sometimes pride prevents people from recognizing when they should simply leave with dignity." A few guests nodded politely, unwilling to challenge one of the country's most influential business families. Others lowered their eyes, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly assumptions had replaced simple courtesy. Daniel finally watched the verification screen finish loading. One line immediately caught his attention. "Executive access level. Owner authorization required." His pulse quickened. He tapped the profile again, but before the remaining details appeared, his radio crackled with another request from backstage reminding him that the signing ceremony would begin in less than 10 minutes. He answered automatically while keeping his eyes fixed on the screen. Across the ballroom, an investment analyst quietly whispered to a colleague, "Have you noticed she has not defended herself once?" The colleague nodded. "People who need to prove power usually speak first. She has not needed to." Madison overheard the conversation and rolled her eyes. Or maybe she knows she has already lost. She stepped closer to Naomi, careful to keep a confident smile on her face. Let me make this easier. Walk out now before everyone remembers you as the woman who interrupted the biggest business celebration of the year. Naomi looked directly at her. People rarely remember interruptions, she replied calmly. They remember choices. The answer was so measured that even several reporters standing near the stage exchanged curious glances. Richard checked his watch impatiently. Enough delays, he said. This partnership represents years of negotiations. We are not allowing unnecessary distractions to overshadow tonight. Daniel suddenly froze as the final section of Naomi's executive profile appeared on his screen. A color reserved only for principal decision makers surrounded her digital credentials. Attached beneath the authorization badge was a confidential note that read, "Final approval required before contract execution." He looked from the screen back to Naomi, then toward the leather portfolio resting on the illuminated signing table. His expression changed completely. For the first time that evening, he realized the ceremony everyone had spent months preparing could not begin without the quiet woman the Sterling family was still trying to dismiss from the very room where their future depended upon her presence. Daniel Cooper felt the weight of the tablet in his hands grow heavier than any contract in the ballroom. He looked at Naomi Brooks once more, comparing the composed woman standing alone against the executive profile glowing on his screen. There was no mistake. The authorization seal belonged only to one person. He took a careful step toward her before stopping himself, realizing that revealing what he knew too early might only create greater confusion. Instead, he approached one of the hotel's senior coordinators and quietly asked for confirmation through the secure event database. Less than 30 seconds later, the coordinator looked up with widened eyes, then immediately lowered the screen so no one else could see it. "Daniel," she whispered, "this cannot be right." He answered just as quietly, "I was hoping it was not." Across the ballroom, Madison noticed the exchange and smiled confidently. "Even the staff is trying to figure out who she is," she joked. Richard Sterling laughed politely while accepting another glass of sparkling water from a passing server. "Eventually facts always catch up with fantasy," he said. Victoria nodded in agreement. "Tonight is about serious business. We cannot allow unnecessary distractions." Their words drifted through the room, but the atmosphere had changed. Guests were no longer laughing as freely. Several executives began watching Naomi instead of the Sterling family. There was something unusual about the way she carried herself. She stood without tension, without embarrassment, almost as though time itself was working in her favor. Daniel finally walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "may I ask you one question?" Naomi met his eyes with the same calm expression she had maintained all evening. "You may." Daniel hesitated before speaking. "Have we met before?" A faint smile appeared on Naomi's face. "Twice," she answered. "The first time was during the Midwest Infrastructure Summit 3 years ago. The second was at the National Transportation Innovation Forum last spring. You coordinated both events exceptionally well." Daniel's heart skipped. He remembered immediately. She had arrived quietly at both conferences, never asking for special treatment despite every executive making room when she entered. Before he could respond, Madison interrupted from several feet away. "Daniel, why are you entertaining this?" she called out. "We have a signing ceremony starting in a few minutes." Daniel looked toward the Sterling family, then back at Naomi. Every instinct told him the evening was heading towards something none of them expected. Nearby, 2 investment bankers quietly compared notes on their phones. One searched photographs from previous business magazines, while the other reviewed the official announcement for the partnership. Neither found what they were looking for, but both agreed on one thing. The woman standing alone looked remarkably familiar. Richard checked his watch again and frowned. "We have delayed long enough," he declared. "If security is unwilling to resolve this misunderstanding, I will speak with hotel management myself." Naomi answered before anyone else could. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling." Her voice remained measured, steady, and unmistakably confident. "Only incomplete information." Those 4 words settled over the ballroom like a gathering storm. Daniel knew exactly what she meant. Yet he also understood that the room was still missing the single piece of information capable of changing every conversation taking place beneath the chandeliers. The signing table remained untouched. The leather portfolio remained closed. And the final approval everyone assumed was waiting had not yet arrived because the one person authorized to give it was still being treated as though she did not belong there at all. Madison Sterling took one slow step forward until she stood directly in front of Naomi Brooks again, her confidence growing stronger with every second that passed without an explanation. Incomplete information, she repeated with a dismissive smile. No, what is incomplete is your understanding of where you are. Before Naomi could respond, Madison reached for the elegant black invitation folder tucked beneath Naomi's arm and pulled it away with a quick motion. She opened it dramatically, glanced at the embossed executive seal without recognizing its significance, then laughed. Anyone can carry a fancy folder, she declared as she handed it to her father. Richard barely looked at it before passing it to Victoria. This proves nothing, he said. Real authority is earned, not performed. Naomi watched the folder change hands without making any attempt to reclaim it. Her calm unsettled Daniel Cooper more than ever. He knew the invitation was genuine. He also knew the Sterling family had just taken possession of credentials belonging to the one person whose approval remained outstanding. Around the ballroom, conversations faded into whispers. Guests sensed they were no longer witnessing an awkward misunderstanding. They were watching a line being crossed. Naomi's eyes rested briefly on the illuminated skyline beyond the ballroom windows, and for an instant another memory returned with remarkable clarity. She remembered standing outside a corporate headquarters in Detroit more than 2 decades earlier, holding a presentation portfolio, while a receptionist politely suggested she leave it with security because the executives were too busy to meet with her. She had walked back to her car that afternoon without anger, only determination. She had rewritten her proposal through the night, found another investor willing to listen, and built opportunities from doors that others had closed. That experience taught her something success never erased. Bias often arrived wearing perfect manners. Tonight it wore designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, and confident smiles. Daniel noticed the distant look in Naomi's eyes and understood she was remembering something much older than this ballroom. He quietly stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said softly enough that only she could hear. "I believe I understand who you are." Naomi gave a slight nod. "Then you also understand why I have not interrupted them." Daniel answered honestly. "Yes, because they are revealing themselves." Those words lingered in his mind as Richard handed the invitation folder back to Madison. She casually placed it on a nearby cocktail table as though it had no value at all. "Security," Richard called toward the supervisors waiting near the entrance. "Please escort this guest from the ballroom before the ceremony begins. We have investors flying in from New York, Dallas, and San Francisco. We are not delaying a $750 million partnership any longer." The supervisors exchanged uncertain glances. Neither moved immediately. Their hesitation did not come from defiance. It came from confusion. Daniel finally turned toward them and quietly raised one hand, signaling them to wait. Richard frowned. "Is there a problem?" Daniel took a careful breath. "I believe there may be information we should verify before anyone leaves this room." Madison shook her head impatiently. "There is nothing left to verify." Naomi slowly reached into the pocket of her jacket and removed her phone. She unlocked the screen with one calm touch and looked at it for only a moment before lifting her eyes back toward the Sterling family. Her expression never changed. Neither satisfaction nor resentment appeared on her face. Only quiet certainty. The ballroom grew so silent that the distant sound of the string quartet tuning their instruments outside the doors seemed unusually loud. Everyone waited, unaware that the next conversation would decide far more than the future of a single business deal. Naomi Brooks looked at the illuminated screen of her phone for only a heartbeat before placing the call against her ear. She did not step away from the ballroom. She did not lower her voice. There was no urgency in her expression because urgency belonged to people who had lost control, and Naomi had not lost anything. The call connected almost instantly. "Good evening, Ms. Brooks," a composed voice answered. It was Carla Evans, her executive assistant, speaking with the calm efficiency developed over years of navigating billion-dollar negotiations. "Go ahead." Naomi kept her eyes on the Sterling family. "Please activate Executive Protocol 7. Carla did not ask for clarification. Confirmed. Executive Protocol 7 is now active. Legal, mergers and acquisitions, executive compliance, and the board notification team are being brought online. Would you like immediate status updates? Naomi answered simply, yes. Carla paused for only a second before continuing. The final agreement package remains unsigned. Your digital authorization has not been submitted. No funds have been released. No partnership has been executed. Naomi thanked her quietly and ended the call. The conversation had lasted less than 30 seconds, yet something invisible had shifted. Daniel Cooper noticed it immediately. His tablet refreshed automatically as secure notifications began appearing across the event management system. Multiple executive access requests were opening simultaneously. Legal review pending. Contract authorization suspended. Principal approval in progress. He stared at the screen, realizing the signing ceremony had just entered a protected status. Richard Sterling noticed Daniel's expression. Is something wrong with the schedule? He asked. Daniel hesitated. The system is updating. Richard dismissed the answer with a wave of his hand. Technology always slows things down. Madison folded her arms confidently. She probably called someone to arrange a ride home. Victoria smiled politely. Sometimes people create drama because they do not know how to accept embarrassment. Naomi remained silent. She had heard variations of those assumptions throughout her career. The difference tonight was that every careless sentence was unfolding in front of witnesses, investors, attorneys, and financial reporters. Around the ballroom, several guests checked their own phones after receiving unexpected calendar alerts announcing a temporary delay to the signing ceremony. A representative from a New York investment fund quietly frowned while reviewing an encrypted email marked priority. Across the room, two attorneys who represented separate financial institutions stepped away from casual conversations and began reading confidential notifications with growing concern. Daniel watched the atmosphere change one quiet moment at a time. No alarms sounded. No dramatic announcement interrupted the evening. Instead, the confidence that had filled the ballroom only minutes earlier slowly dissolved into uncertainty. Even the musicians waiting outside the ballroom doors had not yet been invited to begin the ceremonial processional because approval from the executive scheduling system had suddenly disappeared. Richard checked his watch once again. This delay is becoming unacceptable, he declared. Find whoever controls the authorization process. Daniel looked directly at him before answering carefully. I believe the authorization process has already been found. Richard frowned, clearly irritated. Then bring that person here immediately. Daniel glanced toward Naomi, but stopped himself from speaking. The truth was no longer difficult to recognize. The difficult part was accepting it. Naomi calmly slipped her phone back into her jacket pocket and looked across the ballroom at the polished signing table waiting beneath the bright lights. Every important decision, she said softly, though her voice carried clearly through the quiet room, arrives long before the signature. The signature simply reveals who has been making the decision all along. No one answered. For the first time that evening, even Madison Sterling found herself without a quick remark, because although she still believed she held the advantage, the room itself had begun behaving as though someone else had quietly taken control without raising her voice even once. Richard Sterling took one determined step toward Daniel Cooper, his patience finally exhausted. I asked you a simple question, he said. Who is holding up my signing ceremony? Before Daniel could answer, every phone belonging to the Sterling executive team chimed at nearly the same moment. Several board members standing near the stage glanced down at their screens. Confused expressions replaced confident smiles. One executive quietly whispered, "The authorization window has been frozen." Another looked at his tablet and added, "The contract cannot move forward without principal approval." Richard reached for the nearest screen and read the notification himself. At the top appeared a single line in bold letters, awaiting final executive authorization. Beneath it was one name, Naomi Brooks. He stared at the screen for several long seconds before slowly lifting his eyes toward the woman he had spent the evening trying to remove from the ballroom. Madison noticed the change in her father's face. "What is it?" she asked. Richard did not answer immediately. Victoria stepped closer, reading the same notification over his shoulder. The color drained from her expression. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but unmistakably clear. "Mr. Sterling, the signing ceremony cannot legally begin because Ms. Naomi Brooks has not approved the agreement." Madison laughed nervously. "That makes no sense. She is not even part of this meeting." Daniel looked directly at her. She is the meeting. Silence swept across the ballroom with astonishing speed. Reporters lowered their conversations. Investors stopped checking their messages. Even the musicians waiting outside remained perfectly still as word quietly spread from one guest to another. Naomi took several unhurried steps toward the illuminated signing table. She picked up the leather portfolio that had been waiting beneath the spotlight and gently rested one hand upon it. "For 8 months," she said evenly, "your company negotiated this partnership with Brooks Infrastructure Group. Hundreds of people worked diligently. Attorneys reviewed every page. Engineers planned every milestone. Financial analysts evaluated every projection. Yet tonight, before a single signature was placed on this agreement, you decided that appearance mattered more than character." No one interrupted her. Richard finally managed to speak. "Ms. Brooks, I was not aware." Naomi met his eyes without anger. "That is exactly the problem." Her voice remained steady. "You believed you needed to know my title before deciding whether I deserved basic respect." Madison stood frozen, replaying the evening in her mind. The impulsive slap, the laughter, the assumptions, the invitation folder. Tossed aside like it meant nothing. Every decision suddenly carried consequences she had never imagined. Naomi continued, "You did not question my qualifications. You questioned my presence. You assumed that because I am a black woman dressed simply, I could not possibly belong in the room where your future was being decided." Richard lowered his head. Victoria remained speechless. Daniel quietly retrieved the executive invitation folder from the nearby cocktail table and walked toward Naomi with both hands, returning it respectfully. She accepted it with a simple nod before looking once more at the Sterling family. "You spent the evening waiting for one signature," she said. "You never realized you spent the same evening humiliating the only person authorized to write it." No applause followed. None was needed. The truth itself had become louder than any celebration that had been planned for the ballroom, and every person present understood that the evening would now be remembered not for the partnership everyone expected, but for the moment prejudice collided with authority and lost without a single raised voice. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Richard Sterling stepped forward, his confident posture replaced by visible disbelief. "Ms. Brooks," he began carefully, "there has clearly been a terrible misunderstanding." Naomi looked at him with the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning of the evening. "A misunderstanding is confusing a name," she replied. "This was a series of choices." Richard opened his hands in an appeal that would have seemed impossible only moments earlier. "My daughter acted impulsively. We can address that privately. Let us not allow one unfortunate incident to destroy months of work." Madison lowered her eyes for the first time that night, no longer surrounded by admiration but by uncomfortable silence. Victoria stepped closer as well, speaking with measured restraint. "Our companies have too much at stake. Surely there is a professional way to move forward." Naomi glanced around the ballroom, meeting the eyes of investors, attorneys, reporters, hospitality staff, and guests who had witnessed every moment. "Unfold. Professionalism," she answered, "begins long before a contract reaches the signing table. It begins with how people are treated when you believe they have nothing to offer you." Daniel Cooper quietly stepped beside the podium and waited as his event tablet displayed another secure notification requesting the final decision from Brooks Infrastructure Group. Every executive in the room understood what would happen next. Naomi opened the leather portfolio one final time, reviewing the agreement that dozens of attorneys had spent months refining. She slowly closed the folder without turning a single page. Then she removed her phone once more and placed another call. Carla Evans answered immediately. "Good evening, Ms. Brooks." Naomi spoke with complete clarity. "Please document that Brooks Infrastructure Group is withdrawing from the proposed $750 million strategic partnership with Sterling Holdings, effective immediately." Carla did not hesitate. "Confirmed. Withdrawal is being processed. The agreement will be marked as declined. All pending authorizations will be terminated, and every participating legal team will receive formal notification within the next 5 minutes." Naomi thanked her and ended the call. Almost instantly, phones throughout the ballroom began vibrating again. One after another, executives looked down as identical notifications appeared across secure corporate systems. Transaction canceled. Authorization expired. Partnership withdrawn. Legal distribution complete. Richard stared at his screen as though reading words that refused to make sense. Victoria slowly covered her mouth. Madison looked from one face to another, finally understanding that the evening had changed forever. Several investors quietly stepped away to make urgent phone calls of their own. Financial advisors began discussing revised projections in hushed voices. Attorneys opened laptops and reviewed contingency plans that no one had expected to use. The celebration that had been carefully planned for months dissolved into quiet conversations about consequences, accountability, and opportunity lost. Daniel watched the transformation with mixed emotions. Nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting echoed through the ballroom. No one had celebrated another person's downfall. Instead, a single lawful business decision had accomplished what hours of arguments never could. Naomi placed the unopened agreement back onto the polished signing table exactly where she had found it. "This partnership did not end because of one moment," she said calmly. "It ended because one moment revealed values that months of negotiations failed to uncover." Richard lowered his head, unable to challenge the truth in her words. Around the ballroom, every person present realized they had just witnessed something far more significant than a canceled transaction. They had seen reputation, trust, and leadership measured not by wealth or influence, but by the ordinary respect shown to someone before anyone believed she possessed extraordinary power. Naomi Brooks picked up the invitation folder, gave one final appreciative nod to Daniel Cooper, and turned toward the ballroom doors without another word. No security supervisor stepped into her path. No one questioned where she belonged anymore. The crowd slowly parted on its own, creating a quiet passage through the center of the room. The same executives who had barely noticed her arrival now watched every step she took with complete attention. Daniel stood motionless near the signing table, understanding that the evening had become something no event planner could have scripted. Reporters lowered their cameras instead of chasing dramatic photographs. Somehow the silence carried more weight than any headline they could write. Richard Sterling finally spoke, though his voice lacked the certainty that had defined him only minutes before. "Ms. Brooks, I hope one day you will allow us another opportunity to earn your trust." Naomi paused near the ballroom entrance and looked back only once. "Trust is not created during negotiations," she answered calmly. "It is revealed during ordinary moments when no one believes they are being evaluated." No one challenged her. No one could. Madison remained standing beside the abandoned signing table, staring at the empty chair where she had expected her family to celebrate the largest agreement in company history. For the first time, she understood that influence without humility could disappear faster than it was earned. Victoria quietly placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder, but neither of them found words that could change what had already happened. Around the ballroom, investors resumed their conversations, though they were no longer discussing projected revenue or expansion strategies. Instead, they spoke about leadership, corporate culture, and the cost of allowing assumptions to replace judgment. Several executives exchanged business cards with hospitality employees who had remained professional throughout the evening, complimenting them for maintaining dignity under uncomfortable circumstances. Daniel later submitted his official event report, documenting only verified facts, exact timelines, and observed decisions. He did not need dramatic language because the truth required no embellishment. Months later, business journals would mention that the proposed partnership had ended before execution due to executive discretion, but those articles never captured what the witnesses remembered most. They remembered a woman who refused to answer disrespect with anger. They remembered that real authority never announced itself before it was necessary. They remembered that the most powerful person in the room had spent the longest time being underestimated. Brooks Infrastructure Group moved forward with a different strategic partner whose leadership reflected the values Naomi considered non-negotiable. Industry analysts later described that partnership as one of the strongest infrastructure alliances of the decade. Sterling Holdings eventually recovered financially, but people inside the company often referred to that gala as the evening that permanently changed how executives were trained to welcome every guest, every employee, and every visitor. New leadership programs emphasized respect before status, listening before assumptions, and character before appearances. Daniel occasionally smiled whenever he attended another executive event because he never again looked at a simple name badge. And ordinary business suit, or a quiet arrival, without remembering that remarkable people rarely needed to announce themselves. As for Naomi, she never mentioned the incident publicly. She simply continued building companies, creating opportunities, and leading with the same quiet confidence she had carried into that ballroom. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded recognition. She had simply allowed every person to reveal who they chose to be before making the only decision that truly belonged to her. And that became the lesson everyone carried home that night. Wealth may open doors, titles may reserve seats, and contracts may shape fortunes. But respect is the one investment every person must offer before they know who is standing in front of them. Because the greatest measure of leadership is never how you treat the powerful. It is how you treat the person you mistakenly believe has none.